The stars had belonged to them for 12,000 years. 5 great races ruled the galaxy with absolute power. They called themselves the Galactic Concord, and their word was law across 300 billion star systems. No one challenged them. No one dared to challenge the Concord was to invite destruction so complete that even the memory of your species would be erased from history. The Veloxi were the oldest. They looked like tall insects with 6 arms and compound eyes that could see in spectrums other races could not imagine. They had walked among the stars when most species were still crawling in mud. Their ships were living things, grown from organic matter that healed itself after battle. The Veloxi believed they were the true masters of the universe, chosen by fate itself to guide lesser beings. The Cathmar were warriors. Their bodies were covered in thick scales the color of dried blood. They stood 3 meters tall, and their muscles could crush stone. For 10,000 years, they had served as the military arm of the Concord. When a species needed to be punished, the Cathmar delivered that punishment. They took pride in their work. They believed that war was the highest art form, and they had perfected it. The Sundari Collective was not a single species, but a hive mind. Billions of small creatures shared one consciousness, spreading across thousands of worlds like a living carpet. They could think faster than any computer. They could solve problems that would take other races centuries to understand. The collective served as the scientists and engineers of the Concord, building the great machines that kept the empire running. The Obsidian Throne ruled through fear. Their homeworld was a dark place of volcanic rock and poisonous air. The beings who lived there had adapted to become something terrible. They fed on the life force of other creatures, draining them slowly over years. Worlds that displeased the Obsidian Throne were given to them as feeding grounds. The screams of the dying could last for generations. The Celestine Imperium was perhaps the strangest of the 5. They existed as beings of pure energy, having abandoned their physical forms millions of years ago. They lived inside crystalline structures that floated through space. They considered themselves above the petty concerns of flesh and blood. They rarely spoke at Concord meetings, but when they did, others listened. Their weapons could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. Together, these 5 races had built an empire that stretched from one end of the galaxy to the other. They had conquered or destroyed every species that stood in their way. They had written laws that governed trillions of beings. They had decided which races would live and which would die. In their minds, this was simply the natural order of things. The strong ruled, the weak served. This was how it had always been. This was how it would always be. Or so they believed. On a day that seemed like any other, a monitoring station in a distant corner of the galaxy detected something unusual. Radio waves, primitive electromagnetic signals, coming from an unremarkable yellow star in an uncharted spiral arm. The signals were weak and scattered. They carried sounds and images that made no sense, but they were clearly artificial. Someone was out there, someone the Concord had never encountered. The monitoring station sent its report to the regional command. The regional command sent a summary to the central authority. Within a few days, the information reached the Grand Council of the Concord. The 5 races reviewed the data with mild interest. A new species, primitive technology, no faster than light capability detected. Standard protocol would apply. The Grand Council authorized an evaluation fleet. This was normal procedure for any newly discovered civilization. A fleet would travel to the system, assess the inhabitants, and determine their fate. If the species showed promise, they would be offered a place in the Concord as servants. If they resisted, they would be destroyed. If they were too primitive to be useful, they would be left alone until they developed enough to be worth conquering. The Cathmar volunteered to lead the evaluation. Admiral Feithcor, one of their most celebrated commanders, assembled a fleet that would be more than sufficient for the task. 17 dreadnoughts, each one 5 kilometers long and bristling with weapons. 200 support vessels carrying soldiers, scientists, and diplomats. Enough firepower to destroy a planet in minutes. Enough troops to occupy a world in hours. Admiral Feithcor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Judgment. As his fleet prepared to depart, he was old for a Cathmar, nearly 400 years. His scales had faded from bright red to a dull brown. Scars covered his face and arms, souvenirs from 100 battles. He had crushed rebellions, exterminated species, and brought entire civilizations to their knees. This mission would be routine, a pleasant distraction before his eventual retirement. The fleet entered faster than light travel and crossed the galaxy in a matter of weeks. As they approached the target system, Vithkor ordered his scientists to gather more detailed information about the inhabitants. What they found was almost amusing. The species called themselves humans. They lived on the third planet from their star, a small world of blue water and green land. They had existed for only a few 100,000 years, a mere heartbeat in cosmic terms. Their civilization was barely 10,000 years old. Their technology was laughably primitive. They had only recently developed nuclear power. Their fastest ships could barely reach the nearest planets in their own system. They had not even established colonies on their own moon. More interesting was their social structure. Unlike most species the Concord encountered, humans were not unified. They had divided their world into hundreds of competing nations. They fought wars against each other constantly. They disagreed about everything from economics to religion, to the proper way to prepare food. They were chaotic, disorganized, and seemingly incapable of cooperation. Vithkor reviewed this information with growing contempt. These creatures were barely worthy of attention. They would surrender immediately once they understood the power arrayed against them. If they were foolish enough to resist, they would be swept aside like dust. Either way, this mission would be over within a day. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system the humans called Sol. Vithkor ordered his ships to hold position while they conducted final scans. The human homeworld appeared on his tactical display. A small blue marble hanging in the darkness. Billions of life signs. Thousands of cities. Primitive satellites orbiting in low trajectories. No military assets worth mentioning. "Open a channel," Vithkor commanded. "All frequencies. I want every device on that planet to receive our message." His communications officer obeyed within seconds. Every radio, television, and computer on Earth was displaying the same image. Admiral Vithkor, standing tall in his ceremonial armor, the might of the Concord fleet visible through the windows behind him. "Inhabitants of this world," Vithkor began, speaking in a tone he had used countless times before. "I am Admiral Vithkor of the Keithmar, servant of the Galactic Concord. Your system has been claimed in the name of the 5 ruling races. You have 2 choices: surrender unconditionally and accept your place as subjects of the Concord, or resist and face total annihilation. You have 12 of your hours to respond. Choose wisely." The transmission ended. Vithkor settled back into his command chair and waited. He had delivered this ultimatum to dozens of species over the centuries. The response was always the same: panic, followed by desperate attempts at negotiation, followed by surrender. Sometimes a few stubborn leaders would try to fight, but they never lasted long. The might of the Concord was absolute. Resistance was not just futile, it was insane. On Earth, the reaction was exactly what Vithkor expected. Chaos erupted across the planet. Leaders shouted at each other in emergency sessions. Military commanders scrambled to assess their options. Religious figures proclaimed the end of days. Ordinary people stared at their screens in horror, watching the alien fleet that hung over their world like an executioner's blade. In the first few hours, several nations attempted to communicate with the fleet. They asked for terms. They asked for time. They asked what the Concord wanted. Vithkor ignored all of these messages. He had stated his demands clearly. There was nothing to negotiate. Surrender or die. Those were the only options. As the hours passed, Vithkor grew slightly impatient. Most species responded within the first hour or two. Either they surrendered immediately, or they launched some pathetic attack that his fleet destroyed without effort. These humans were doing neither. They were simply waiting, talking among themselves, making no move to surrender or resist. Perhaps they are too primitive to understand their situation. His second-in-command suggested they may not comprehend the threat they face. Vithkor considered this. It was possible. Species at this level of development often had difficulty grasping the scale of galactic civilization. They might think the fleet was some kind of illusion or trick. They might be waiting for their gods to save them. They might simply be too stupid to know they were doomed. "Send another transmission," Vithkor ordered. Show them footage of previous conquests. Let them see what happens to those who defy the Concord. The second transmission was sent. It contained recordings of planets being bombarded from orbit, cities reduced to ash, species being herded into labor camps or extermination centers. The message was clear. This was not a bluff. This was not a negotiation. This was reality, and the humans would either accept it or die. Still, no response came. Bethor checked the time. 11 hours had passed. 1 hour remained before the deadline. If the humans did not surrender, he would begin the bombardment. He felt no particular emotion about this. The extinction of a species was neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It was simply a task to be completed. He had done it before. He would do it again. The final hour began to tick away. Bethor's crew prepared the weapon systems. Target coordinates were locked in. The first wave of plasma lances would strike the major population center simultaneously. Within minutes, billions would die. Within hours, the planet would be a lifeless rock. The system would be marked as sterilized, and the fleet would return home. Another routine mission completed. With 5 minutes remaining, the communications officer suddenly sat up straight. "Admiral," she said, her voice uncertain. "We are receiving a transmission from the planet on screen." The main display flickered to life. A human female appeared, standing in some kind of underground facility. She was small by Cathmar standards, barely 1.5 meters tall. Her hair was gray, her face lined with age. She wore a simple uniform with no decorations or rank insignia. Behind her, other humans worked at computer consoles, their movements quick and purposeful. "Admiral Vithkor," the female said. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. "My name is Helena Vasquez. I speak for the unified governments of Earth." Vithkor leaned forward slightly. This was unusual. Most species, when they finally responded, did so with tears and begging. This human showed no fear at all. "Your deadline is almost over," Vithkor said. "Have you come to surrender?" "No," Helen Vasquez replied. "We have come to decline your offer." Silence filled the bridge of the Crimson Judgment. Vithor stared at the screen, certain he had misunderstood. In 12,000 years, no species had ever declined the Conqueror's ultimatum. It was inconceivable. It was absurd. It was suicide. "You decline," Vithor repeated slowly. "You understand what this means?" "We understand perfectly," Vasquez said. "Your fleet will attack. You will try to destroy us. We will resist. You will resist." Vithkor almost laughed. "With what? Your primitive rockets, your nuclear weapons that can barely reach your own moon. You have nothing that can challenge even one of my ships, let alone 17. Admiral Vasquez said, and something in her tone made Vithkor pause. "You have made an error, a serious one. You assume that because our public technology is primitive, we have no other capabilities. You assume that because we fight among ourselves, we cannot unite against a common threat. You assume that because we are young, we are weak." She smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "All of your assumptions are wrong." The transmission ended. Vithkor stared at the blank screen for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then he shook his head and rose from his chair. "Foolish creatures," he said. "Begin the bombardment. Destroy their cities. Destroy their military installations. Destroy everything. Leave nothing alive." His crew moved to obey. The weapon systems powered up. The targeting computers finalized their calculations. In moments, the first plasma lances would fire, and the species called humanity would begin its journey toward extinction. Then the sensors screamed a warning. "Contact," the tactical officer shouted. "Something is emerging from the planet's atmosphere. Single vessel moving at extreme velocity." Bethor's eyes narrowed. "What kind of vessel?" "A missile. Unknown configuration. It's Admiral. It's huge. 2 kilometers long, and it's heading directly for us." The main display switched to show the approaching object. Vithkor felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Surprise. The ship rising from Earth was unlike anything in the Concord's databases. It was angular and aggressive, covered in weapon systems that glowed with barely contained power. It moved with a speed that should have been impossible for something its size. "Where did they get that?" someone whispered. Vithkor had no answer. The Concorde's intelligence had been clear. Humans had no spacefaring capabilities beyond primitive chemical rockets. They could barely reach their own moon. They should not have been able to build something like this. It was impossible. But there it was, climbing toward his fleet, like a predator rising from the depths. "All ships," Vithor commanded, his voice steady, despite his shock. "Target that vessel. Fire at will." The fleet responded instantly. Hundreds of plasma lances converged on the human ship, each one carrying enough energy to melt through a kilometer of solid rock. It was enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Nothing could survive such an onslaught. The human ship's shields lit up like a second sun. The plasma lances splashed against them and dissipated harmlessly. The ship kept coming. Vithor gripped the arms of his chair. Impossible. The Concorde's weapons were designed to overcome any defense. They had destroyed thousands of enemy vessels over the millennia. Nothing had ever simply shrugged off a full fleet bombardment. "Continue firing," he ordered. "All weapons, bring that ship down." The fleet poured everything it had into the attack. Rail guns, plasma lances, missile barges, energy beams. The space between the Concorde ships and the human vessel became a storm of destructive power. Still, the human ship advanced, its shields flickering but holding. Then it began to fire back. Vithor watched in disbelief as beams of brilliant white light lanced out from the human vessel. They struck the nearest Concorde cruiser, cutting through its armor like it was paper. The cruiser exploded, killing 3,000 Cathmar soldiers in an instant. Another beam struck another ship, then another, and another. The human vessel carved through the support fleet like a blade through soft flesh. Ships that had fought in 100 battles, crewed by warriors who had trained their entire lives, died in seconds. The tactical display filled with warning lights as vessel after vessel was destroyed. "How?" Vithor demanded. "How is this possible?" No one answered. No one could. They were witnessing something that should not exist. A single ship, built by a species that should have been primitive, was tearing apart a Concorde evaluation fleet. The natural order of the galaxy was being overturned before their eyes. The human vessel turned toward the Crimson Judgment. For a moment, Vithor looked directly at the ship that would kill him. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. A weapon forged by a species that refused to accept its place in the universe. A declaration of war against the powers that had ruled the stars since before humanity's ancestors had climbed down from the trees. Then the human ship fired something else. Not a beam, not a missile. Something Vithor had never seen before. A wave of distortion that twisted space itself. The Crimson Judgment, flagship of the Cathmar battle fleet, simply ceased to exist. Admiral Vithor, who had lived for 400 years and conquered 100 worlds, was erased from reality in less than a heartbeat. He never even had time to feel fear. The remaining Concorde ships tried to flee. Some made it to faster than light speed and escaped. Most did not. The human vessel hunted them down one by one, destroying them with weapons that seemed to violate the laws of physics. When it was over, 11 of 17 dreadnoughts were gone. More than 100 support vessels had been destroyed. Tens of thousands of conquered soldiers were dead, and in the center of the devastation floated a single human ship, battered and scarred, but very much intact. On Earth, Helena Vasquez watched the battle's conclusion on her tactical display. Her face showed no triumph, no celebration, only grim determination. This was just the beginning. The Concorde would not accept this defeat. They would return with more ships, more weapons, more determination to crush the species that had dared to defy them. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, humanity had done something no species had done in 12,000 years. They had said no to the rulers of the galaxy, and they had made it stick. The stars would never be the same. Captain James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and watched his crew die. The ship had won. 11 enemy dreadnoughts destroyed. The alien fleet scattered and fleeing. A victory that should have been impossible. But victory had come at a terrible price. The Prometheus was bleeding atmosphere from dozens of hull breaches. Fires burned in compartments throughout the vessel. The artificial gravity flickered on and off, making movement dangerous and unpredictable. And everywhere, In corridors and engine rooms and weapon stations, his people lay dead or dying. Okono himself was not in good shape. A piece of shrapnel had torn across his face during the battle, blinding his left eye and leaving a wound that still bled, despite the emergency bandage pressed against it. His ribs were broken. His left arm hung useless at his side. But he was alive. He was still standing. And he still had a ship to save. "Damage report," he ordered, his voice steady despite the pain. His executive officer, Commander Sarah Chen, pulled herself up from where she had fallen during the last enemy barrage. Blood covered the side of her head, but her eyes were clear and focused. She consulted a flickering display screen. "Shields are gone," she said, completely burned out. "Main power is at 12% and falling. We have hull breaches on decks 3 through 7, 11 through 15, and 22 through 28. Life support is failing in the forward sections. Weapon systems are offline. Navigation is offline. Communications are operating at reduced capacity." She paused and her voice grew quieter. "Current casualty estimate is 67% of crew. Most of our wounded need immediate medical attention. Our medical bay was destroyed in the third exchange. We have 1 functioning surgery unit and 6 medics still alive." Okono closed his good eye and absorbed this information. The Prometheus had launched with a crew of 3,000. More than 2,000 of them were now dead. Many more would die in the coming hours without proper medical care. His beautiful ship, humanity's greatest achievement, was a burning wreck, barely holding itself together. But they had won. "Send a signal to Earth," Okono said. "Tell them the threat has been neutralized for now." The communications officer, a young man whose name Okonkwo could not remember through the fog of pain and exhaustion, worked his damaged console. After a moment, he nodded. "Message sent. Captain Director Vasquez is requesting a direct link." "Put her through." Helena Vasquez's face appeared on the main screen. She looked older than she had before the battle, as if the past few hours had aged her by years. Behind her, the command center was filled with activity, as staff members monitored the aftermath. "Captain Okonkwo," she said, "the whole world saw what you did, what your crew did. There are no words sufficient to express our gratitude." "Don't thank us yet," Okono replied. "This was just the first round. Those ships that escaped will report back to their masters. When they learn what happened here, they will send more, many more. We know. How badly is the Prometheus damaged?" Okono laughed, though it hurt his broken ribs. "She will never fly again. Not without months in a repair dock. We accomplished our mission, Director, but it cost us everything. The Prometheus is finished on the screen." Vasquez nodded slowly. Her expression was unreadable. "Then it is fortunate that the Prometheus was never meant to fight alone. Come home, Captain. There is much work to do." The transmission ended. Okono stared at the blank screen for a moment, wondering what Vasquez had meant. Then he pushed the question aside. "Survival first, questions later. All hands," he announced over the ship-wide communication system. "This is the captain. We are going home. But first, we need to keep this ship in one piece long enough to get there. I need everyone who can still move to report to damage control. If you can walk, you can work. If you can breathe, you can help. We did not survive this battle to die on the way back. Move." The survivors of the Prometheus crew moved. They sealed hull breaches with emergency patches. They fought fires with whatever equipment still functioned. They carried the wounded to the few safe areas that remained. They worked through exhaustion and pain and grief, because stopping meant dying, and they had not come this far to give up now. It took 6 hours to stabilize the ship enough for the journey home. 6 hours of constant labor. 6 hours of discovering new problems and finding ways to solve them with damaged equipment and depleted resources. When the Prometheus finally began its slow descent toward Earth, Okono allowed himself to sit down for the first time since the battle began. Commander Chen sat beside him. She had refused treatment for her own injuries until all other wounded had been cared for. Now she looked almost as bad as Okonkwo felt. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" she asked. "Granted. How did we win?" "I have been a military officer for 20 years. I studied tactics at the best mise on Earth. Nothing I learned prepared me for what happened today. That alien fleet should have destroyed us in seconds. We should all be dead." Okono considered the question. He had been asking himself the same thing since the battle ended. "I have been thinking about that," he said slowly. "I think they underestimated us. Not just our weapons, but us. They saw our technology and assumed they knew everything they needed to know. They did not consider that we might have hidden capabilities. They did not imagine that we would fight the way we did." "What do you mean? Did you see how they reacted when we took damage, when our shields failed and their weapons started hitting our hull? They expected us to retreat, to surrender. Every time they heard us, they paused, waiting for us to give up." Okono shook his head. "They have never fought a species like us. They do not understand that humans fight harder when we are wounded. We do not surrender. We do not retreat. We find another way to win, or we die trying." Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "A lot of good people died today, proving that point." "Yes," Okono agreed, "and their sacrifice may have saved our entire species. I will mourn them. I will honor them. But I will not regret what we did. We had no choice." The Prometheus limped home through the darkness of space. Behind it, the wreckage of the alien fleet tumbled silently through the void, a testament to what humanity could accomplish when its back was against the wall. On Earth, the world had changed. The alien transmission had been seen by every person on the planet. The battle that followed had been tracked by every telescope and sensor array that could be pointed at the sky. For the first time in history, humanity knew with absolute certainty that they were not alone in the universe, and they knew that the universe was not friendly. Governments that had been enemies for generations now worked together. Resources that had been hoarded were now shared. Secrets that had been kept for decades were now revealed. The Global Defense Initiative, which had operated in shadow for 70 years, stepped into the light. Director Vasquez addressed the world from the GDI headquarters in Geneva. She stood before a wall of screens showing the damaged Prometheus as it approached Earth, living proof of what humanity had accomplished. "For 70 years, she began, the governments of Earth have maintained a secret. In 1952, an alien probe crashed in Siberia. That probe contained technology beyond anything we had ever imagined. The leaders of that time faced a choice. They could fight over this technology, using it to gain advantages over each other, or they could recognize that one day, the beings who built that probe might return, and humanity would need to be ready." She paused, letting her words sink in. They chose to prepare. The Global Defense Initiative was created to study the alien technology and develop defenses for our planet. Scientists from every nation worked together in hidden facilities. They reverse-engineered systems they barely understood. They developed weapons and shields and propulsion methods that seemed like magic, and they built the Prometheus, the ship that just saved our world. The screens behind her changed, showing blueprints and schematics. The Prometheus was never meant to be our only defense. It was the first of many. Even now, 3 more vessels are under construction: the Prometheus II, the Prometheus III, and the Prometheus IV. Each one is larger and more powerful than the original. Within 5 years, we will have a fleet capable of defending our solar system against any threat. She looked directly into the camera. "Today, we won a battle, but the war is just beginning. The aliens who attacked us are part of something called the Galactic Concord, a coalition of 5 ancient races that have ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years. They will not accept what happened here. They will return, and when they do, we must be ready." Vasquez's message spread across the planet. Within hours, millions of people were volunteering for the new unified military. Factories that had made consumer goods began converting to military production. Research institutions dedicated their resources to improving the technologies the GDI had developed. Humanity, so often divided by petty conflicts, united against a common enemy. But not everyone was celebrating. In the ruins of an old military bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, a small group of people gathered around a secure communications terminal. They were the surviving members of the original GDI leadership team, the men and women who had dedicated their lives to preparing for this moment. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the chief scientist of the Prometheus project, spoke first. The severance weapon performed beyond expectations. Complete molecular dissociation of the target vessel. No debris, no residual energy. The enemy flagship simply ceased to exist, and we still do not understand how it works, added Dr. Marcus Webb, her colleague. We built it based on the alien probe's specifications. We know it functions. We have no idea why. Does it matter? Asked General Viktor Sokolov, the military commander of the GDI. The weapon works. That is enough. It matters, Dr. Tanaka insisted. Because we need to build more of them. We need to improve them, and we cannot do either without understanding the underlying principles. Right now, we are like children, playing with a loaded gun. We got lucky once. We may not get lucky again. Director Vasquez listened to the debate without comment. She was thinking about the escaped alien ships speeding toward their home space with news of their defeat. She was thinking about the Council of Ancient Races that would receive that news. She was thinking about what they would do next. How long do we have? She asked, interrupting the technical discussion. Everyone fell silent. General Sokolov consulted his datapad. Based on the alien fleet observed speed, and assuming their faster-than-light capabilities are consistent with the probe we recovered, they will reach their nearest base in approximately 3 weeks. Add time for deliberation and fleet assembly. We estimate 4 to 6 months before a response force arrives. 6 months to prepare for an enemy that has conquered the galaxy, Vasquez said quietly. Can we do it? We have no choice, Afokov replied. The question is not whether we can. The question is whether they will give us that long. The meeting continued for hours, planning the defense of a species that had suddenly found itself at war with the universe. Resources were allocated. Production schedules were established. Recruitment targets were set. By the time it ended, the outline of humanity's survival strategy had taken shape. Meanwhile, in a hospital room overlooking the Alps, Captain Okonkwo lay in a medical bed. As doctors worked to repair the damage to his body, his left eye was gone. Beyond even the advanced technology the GDI possessed to restore, his arm had been saved. Though it would take months of therapy before it worked properly again. His ribs had been reinforced with synthetic materials that were stronger than bone. He would never be the same as he was before the battle, but he would survive, and he would fight again. Commander Chen visited him on the second day of his recovery. She looked better than she had on the ship, though a bandage still covered the wound on her head. The final casualty count is in, she said without preamble. 24,047 dead, another 600 wounded, of which approximately 200 will require long-term care. The Prometheus has been declared a total loss. She will be dismantled for parts and study. Okono nodded slowly. He had expected as much. And the crew who survived, what happens to them? They are heroes, Chen said. Every single one. The director wants to give them medals, promotions, whatever honors exist, but most of them just want to get back to work. They know what is coming. Good. Okono pushed himself up in the bed, ignoring the protests of his damaged body. What about you, Commander? What do you want? Chen smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. I want to be on the bridge of the Prometheus 2 when the aliens come back. I want to look them in the eyes and show them that killing our friends only made us angrier. That can be arranged, came a voice from the doorway. Director Vasquez stepped into the room, her face showing the strain of the past few days. Captain Okonkwo, Commander Chen, I hope I am not interrupting. Director Okono said. What brings you here? Vasquez moved to stand by the window, looking out at the mountains beyond. The world has changed, she said. You changed it. What happened in orbit has given humanity something it has never had before, a common purpose. For the first time in history, we are truly united. Unity born from fear, Chen observed. Perhaps, but unity nonetheless. Vasquez turned to face them. I came to ask you both a question. The Prometheus 2 will be ready for trials in 3 months. She is bigger than the original, more powerful, better armed. She will need a captain who understands what we are facing, a captain who has looked the enemy in the eye and refused to blink. She looked at Okonkwo. Will you command her? Okono did not hesitate. Yes, and Commander Chen will be your executive officer. If she accepts. Chen nodded. I accept. Good. Vasquez's expression softened slightly. Get some rest, both of you. Recover your strength. The enemy is coming, and we need you ready. She left as quietly as she had arrived. Okono lay back against his pillow, his mind already racing with plans and possibilities. 3 months to recover. 3 more months to learn a new ship, then back into the void to face whatever the galaxy would send against them. It was not enough time. It would never be enough time. But it was what they had, and humanity had always been good at making do with what they had. In the dark spaces between the stars, the survivors of the Concorde fleet raced toward home. They carried news that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. A primitive species, armed with impossible technology, had defeated a fleet that should have been invincible. The natural order of the universe had been challenged. The elder races would not let this stand. They could not let this stand. If one primitive species could defy them, others might try. The entire structure of the Concorde depended on the belief that resistance was futile. That belief had just been shattered. War was coming, not a police action, not a punitive expedition. A true war fought with all the resources the 5 ruling races could bring to bear. They would crush these humans. They would burn their world to ash. They would erase every trace of their existence from the galaxy, or so they intended. But the humans had other plans. They always did. In shipyards across the Earth, workers labored around the clock. Metal was forged. Circuits were assembled. Weapons were tested and refined. The skeleton of the Prometheus II rose from its construction bay, a phoenix being born from the ashes of its predecessor. And in 1,000 other facilities, 1,000 other projects advanced. New shield designs, new weapon systems, new propulsion methods, new tactics. Humanity threw everything it had into preparing for the next battle. Knowing that failure meant extinction, the galaxy had believed it ruled power. It had measured strength in ships and weapons, and the age of civilizations. It had forgotten, or perhaps never knew, that true power comes not from what you have, but from what you are willing to do to protect what you love. Humanity was willing to do anything, everything, whatever it took. The stars would learn this lesson. One way or another, the Grand Council of the Galactic Concorde had not assembled in full for over 1,000 years. The 5 ruling races preferred to manage their affairs separately, communicating through diplomatic channels when necessary. They had long ago divided the galaxy into spheres of influence. Each race ruled its territory as it saw fit. Cooperation was rare, competition was constant, trust was non-existent. But the news from the Sol system changed everything. The council chamber was a vast artificial construct, floating in the void between galaxies. It had been built in the early days of the Concorde, when the 5 races first agreed to stop fighting each other and start fighting everyone else. The chamber was neutral ground, a place where ancient enemies could meet without fear of treachery. No weapons were allowed within 1,000 kilometers. No military vessels could approach. Here, and only here, the rulers of the galaxy spoke as equals. The Voxy matriarch arrived first. She was ancient beyond human comprehension, her insectoid body withered by millennia of existence. She had ruled her race for 6,000 years, guiding them through wars and plagues and disasters. She had seen species rise and fall. She had watched stars be born and die. Nothing in the universe surprised her anymore. Until now. The Caithmar delegation came next. They were led by Grand Marshal Torvek, the highest military authority in their civilization. He was young by Caithmar standards, only 200 years old, but he had proven himself in countless campaigns. His predecessor had died in the Sol system, and Torv had been elevated to replace him. He came to this council seeking vengeance. The Sundari collective manifested as a shimmering cloud of tiny organisms that flowed through the chamber like living smoke. The billions of individual creatures that made up the collective shared a single consciousness, thinking thoughts too complex for any single mind to comprehend. They had spent the past weeks analyzing every piece of data from the Sol system battle. Their conclusions were disturbing. The Obsidian Throne sent a single representative, a creature of shadow and hunger that seemed to absorb the light around it. The representative did not speak. It did not need to. Its presence was enough to remind the other races of what the throne could do to those who displeased it. The Celestine Imperium appeared last. Their ambassador was a being of pure energy, contained within a crystalline matrix, floating above the council table like a captured star. The Celestine rarely concerned themselves with the affairs of physical beings. Their presence at this meeting indicated how seriously they took the situation. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Voxy matriarch broke the silence. "You have all seen the recordings," she said. Her voice was dry and rustling like dead leaves in the wind. "You know what happened at Sol? One ship, one primitive ship, built by creatures who learned to fly less than a century ago. And it destroyed a fleet that should have been invincible. The fleet was undermanned," Grand Marshal Torv growled. Admiral Feithkor was overconfident. He did not take proper precautions. "This failure does not reflect the true strength of the Cathmar military. The fleet included 17 dreadnoughts." The Sundari Collective responded, speaking with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. 11 were destroyed. 6 escaped. Analysis of the battle data indicates that the human vessel employed at least 3 weapon systems unknown to our databases. Their shields operated on principles we do not understand. Their primary weapon appears to cause complete molecular dissociation of target matter. "Impossible," Torv said. "Such technology does not exist. It exists now," the collective replied. "The question is not whether it exists. The question is where it came from." The Celestine ambassador pulsed with light. "We have examined the energy signatures from the battle." It said its voice was like music, beautiful and terrible. "The weapon the humans used to destroy Admiral Feithkor's flagship operates on principles similar to our own dimensional technology. But the application is different, cruder, more violent." "Are you saying the humans somehow acquired Celestistine technology?" the matriarch asked. "No, I am saying that they developed something similar independently, or perhaps not so independently. There are other explanations." The Celestine paused. "We are not the only ancient power in this universe. There are things older than us. Things that existed before the stars were born. Things that might have reasons to arm a primitive species against us." Silence fell over the council. The possibility that the humans had outside help was disturbing. The possibility that help might have come from something older than the Concord itself was terrifying. "Whatever the source of their technology," Torv said, breaking the uncomfortable silence, "the humans must be destroyed. They defied us. They killed our soldiers. They embarrassed us before the entire galaxy. If we allow this to stand, every subject race in the Concord will begin to question our authority." "For once, I agree with the Cathmar," the Obsidian Throne's representative whispered. Its voice was like a cold wind from a grave. "These humans must die. All of them. Their world must be sterilized. Their name must be erased from history. This is the only appropriate response." The Veloxy matriarch turned her compound eyes toward the Sundari Collective. "What does the collective recommend?" The shimmering cloud shifted and swirled. "We have run 64 million simulations based on available data. In 93% of scenarios, a sufficiently large military force can overcome the human defenses. However, sufficiently large is a relative term. Based on our analysis, we would recommend a minimum of 200 dreadnoughts supported by appropriate auxiliary vessels. Additionally, we recommend deploying weapons capable of planetary destruction. The humans must not be given the opportunity to surrender. They must be eliminated completely and without mercy." 200 dreadnoughts, Torv repeated. "That is more than half of the Cathmar active battle fleet. It is the minimum necessary to ensure victory," the collective replied. "The humans have shown capabilities that exceed our projections. It would be unwise to underestimate them again." The Celestine ambassador pulsed again. "The Imperium will contribute 50 vessels to the assault. We have concerns about the technology the humans have developed. We wish to examine it more closely and destroy it more thoroughly." The discussion continued for hours. Resources were allocated. Command structures were established. A timeline was set. The combined fleet would launch in 4 months, giving the various races time to assemble their forces. The attack would be overwhelming. The humans would have no chance to resist. When the council finally adjourned, the Veloxy matriarch remained behind. She floated alone in the vast chamber, thinking thoughts that had troubled her for millennia. She was not a sentimental creature. She had ordered the extinction of dozens of species over her long life. She felt no guilt about it. The universe was harsh. Only the strong survived. This was the way of things. But she remembered what the universe had been like before the Concord. War without end, chaos without limit, species destroying each other in pointless conflicts that benefited no one. The Concord had brought order to that chaos. It had created stability, peace of a sort. Yes, The peace was enforced by violence. Yes, countless beings suffered under Concord rule, but the alternative was worse. And now these humans threatened to upset everything, not because they were powerful. A single species, no matter how capable, could not challenge the combined might of the 5 ruling races, but because they had demonstrated something dangerous, the possibility of resistance. For 12,000 years, the conquered had maintained its power through the belief that resistance was futile. Subject races accepted their status because they believed they had no choice. But if the humans could fight back, if a species barely out of its planetary cradle could destroy a Concord fleet, then others might begin to wonder, what if they too could resist? What if the Concord was not as invincible as it appeared? The matriarch had seen empires fall before. She knew that they rarely collapsed from external pressure. They rotted from within as subjects lost faith in their masters. The humans were not just a military threat. They were an ideological one, and that made them far more dangerous than any weapon. They had to die. Not for revenge, not for punishment, for the simple, cold necessity of maintaining the order that kept the galaxy from tearing itself apart. The matriarch departed the council chamber and began the long journey home. Behind her, the wheels of galactic war began to turn. On Earth, humanity was unaware of the council's deliberations, but they were not idle. The 4 months the Conquered had allocated for fleet assembly were used wisely. The Prometheus II was completed ahead of schedule. She was a magnificent vessel, 3 kilometers long and bristling, with improved versions of the weapons that had won the first battle. Her shields were stronger, her hull was thicker, her crew was larger and better trained. Captain Okonkwo walked her corridors with quiet pride, still adjusting to the loss of his eye, but more determined than ever to protect his world. The Prometheus III and IV were close behind. Both ships were designed for different roles than their predecessors. The III was a carrier capable of launching hundreds of smaller attack craft. The IV was a siege vessel, equipped with weapons designed to destroy space stations and orbital defenses. Together with the two, they would form the core of Earth's defensive fleet. But Director Vasquez knew that 4 ships, no matter how powerful, would not be enough. The enemy would return in greater numbers. They would learn from their mistakes. The next battle would not be like the first. So, she authorized other projects, secret projects, projects that pushed the boundaries of what humanity thought was possible. In a facility beneath the Pacific Ocean, scientists worked to unlock the secrets of the Severance weapon. They still did not understand how it worked. The technology was based on principles that seemed to violate everything they knew about physics, but they were making progress. Slowly, painfully, they were beginning to comprehend the forces they had unleashed. In orbit around Mars, a massive construction project was underway. It looked like a space station, but it was something else entirely. A defensive platform armed with weapons that could strike targets millions of kilometers away. The first of many such platforms designed to create a web of fire that any enemy fleet would have to penetrate to reach Earth. On the Moon, factories produced weapons and ammunition at a rate that would have seemed impossible a year ago. The raw materials came from asteroids, dragged into lunar orbit by automated mining ships. Humanity had expanded its industrial base beyond anything the enemy could have predicted. And in hidden bunkers across the Earth, special teams trained for a mission that might never happen. If the orbital defenses failed, if the fleet was destroyed, if the enemy reached Earth itself, these teams would be the last line of defense. They learned to fight in cities and jungles and mountains. They studied the aliens' physiology, searching for weaknesses. They prepared for a war that would make the conflicts of human history seem like playground scuffles. Captain Okonkwo spent his recovery time studying the enemy. He watched recordings of the first battle over and over, analyzing every move the alien ships had made. He learned their attack patterns, their defensive tactics, their weaknesses. When he wasn't studying, he was training with his new crew, drilling them until they could perform their duties in their sleep. Commander Chen was his constant companion in these efforts. Her skills as an officer had only improved since the first battle. She had a talent for seeing patterns that others missed, for anticipating problems before they developed. Okono trusted her completely. He knew that when the enemy came, she would be at his side. 3 months after the first battle, The long-range sensors detected something troubling. A fleet was assembling in a star system approximately 200 light-years away. The ships were gathering from multiple directions, converging on a single point. Analysis of their energy signatures indicated vessels from all 5 conquered races. Director Vasquez received the report in her office. She read it twice, then sat it down and stared at the wall. "How many?" she asked. The intelligence officer who had delivered the report swallowed nervously. "Our best estimate is between 200 and 250 capital ships, ma'am, plus support vessels. Total fleet strength could exceed 500 vessels. 500 ships against 4. The math was not encouraging. Time until they reach us. Based on their observed faster-than-light capabilities, approximately 1 month after they launch, we estimate they will launch within 3 to 4 weeks. 2 months. They had 2 months to prepare for an assault force that dwarfed anything humanity had ever imagined. 2 months to find a way to survive against overwhelming odds." Vasquez picked up her communicator. "Get me Captain Okonkwo, and assemble the War Council. We have work to do." The War Council met in the deepest bunker beneath Geneva. Military commanders from every nation on Earth gathered around a holographic display that showed the enemy fleet assembling, each dot representing a ship that could destroy cities. Okono presented his analysis of the situation. It was not optimistic. "We cannot win a straight fight," he said bluntly. "Our ships are better than theirs individually, but not by enough to overcome these numbers. If we meet them in open space, they will surround us and destroy us through sheer weight of fire." "Then what do you recommend?" General Sokov asked. "We do not fight in open space. We fight here in our own system, using every advantage we can create." Okono manipulated the display, showing the positions of the defensive platforms and weapon stations that had been deployed over the past months. "We force them to come to us. We make them fight through layers of defenses. We bleed them at every step." "Will it be enough?" Director Vasquez asked. Okonkwo hesitated. Then he said, "I do not know, but it is the best chance we have." The council debated for hours. Plans were drawn up and discarded. Resources were allocated and reallocated. By the time the meeting ended, they had something that resembled a strategy. It was desperate. It was risky. It required everything to go exactly right. But it was the only chance they had. Over the following weeks, Earth prepared for war. Civilians were evacuated from major cities, moved to underground shelters that might survive orbital bombardment. Essential industries were relocated to hidden facilities. Food and water were stockpiled. Medical supplies were distributed. Everything was done with quiet efficiency, a species preparing for its final stand. Captain Okonkwo spent his last days on Earth visiting the families of the crew who had died on the original Prometheus. He sat in living rooms and apologized for not bringing their loved ones home. He listened to stories about the dead. He promised that their sacrifices would not be forgotten. It was exhausting, it was painful, but it was necessary. These people deserved to know that their sons and daughters, and husbands and wives, had died for something that mattered. On the last day before launch, he stood on a beach in Kenya, looking up at the stars that had once seemed so peaceful and distant. Somewhere out there, a fleet was coming to destroy everything he loved, everything humanity had ever built, everything they had ever dreamed. Commander Chen found him there, as the sun set over the Indian Ocean. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "No," Okono replied. "Just remembering this beach, this sky, this world. We have done terrible things to each other over the centuries. Wars, genocides, cruelties that defy comprehension. But we also built beautiful things, art and music and literature, cities and bridges and gardens. We reached for the stars when we could barely feed ourselves. We kept dreaming even when the dream seemed impossible." He turned to face her. "That is what we are fighting for. Not just survival, but the right to keep dreaming. The right to decide our own future. The right to be more than servants to creatures who see us as insects." Chen nodded slowly. "Then let us go show them what insects can do." They left the beach together and headed for the shuttle that would take them to the Prometheus 2. Behind them, the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It was the last sunset either of them would see for a very long time. In the darkness between the stars, the Concorde fleet began to move. The Concorde fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, at the edge of the Sol system. 237 capital ships, accompanied by 400 support vessels. More firepower than any force the galaxy had ever assembled against a single world. The combined military might of 5 ancient civilizations, united for the first time in millennia, aimed at one small blue planet, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Supreme Commander Ventron, daughter of the late Admiral Venthcor, stood on the bridge of her flagship and surveyed the display before her. She had inherited her father's command after his death in the first battle. She had inherited his hatred for the species that had killed him, and she had inherited his determination to see them burn. But unlike her father, Fathron was not overconfident. She had studied the recordings of the first battle. She had analyzed every mistake the original fleet had made. She understood that the humans were dangerous. That was why she had insisted on such overwhelming force. There would be no surprises this time. No hidden capabilities that could turn the tide. Just the cold mathematics of superior numbers, grinding the enemy into dust. All ships report ready, her communications officer announced. Awaiting your orders, Supreme Commander. Vithran allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. This was the largest fleet she had ever commanded. The largest fleet any Cathmar had ever commanded. When she destroyed the humans, her name would be remembered for millennia. Songs would be sung about her victory. Statues would be raised in her honor. Begin the advance, she ordered. Standard formation. Maintain spacing. Do not underestimate the enemy. The fleet moved inward. Thousands of engines flared to life as the ships began their journey toward Earth. At the speed they were traveling, they would reach the inner system in approximately 6 hours. 6 hours, until the killing began. On Earth, the alarm started screaming. Captain Okonkwo was on the bridge of the Prometheus II when the alert came through. He had been expecting it for days, watching the long-range sensors for any sign of the approaching enemy. Now that the moment had arrived, he felt strangely calm. The waiting was over. The battle was here. Everything he had trained for, everything he had prepared for, would be put to the test. All hands to battle stations, he announced over the ship-wide communication system. This is not a drill. Enemy fleet detected at the system's edge. We launch in 30 minutes. The crew responded with practiced efficiency. Stations were manned. Systems were checked. Weapons were armed. The Prometheus II hummed with barely contained power. A predator awakening for the hunt. Commander Chen took her position at the tactical station. Her face showed no emotion, but Okonkwo could see the tension in her shoulders. She was afraid. They were all afraid. Only fools felt no fear when facing certain death. Status of the defense network? Okono asked. All platforms report ready, Chen replied. Outer perimeter stations are locked and loaded. The Prometheus 3 and 4s are in position. All fighter squadrons are standing by. Okono nodded. The defense plan was simple in concept, though complex in execution. The enemy would have to fight through 3 layers of defenses before reaching Earth. The outer perimeter consisted of automated weapons platforms designed to thin the enemy ranks and force them to spread their formation. The middle layer was the mobile defense force, the 4 Prometheus-class ships and their supporting fighters. The inner layer was the orbital defense grid, the last barrier between the enemy and humanity's homeworld. Each layer would take its toll. Each layer would cost the enemy ships and lives. The question was whether the toll would be high enough to matter. Launch the fleet, Okono commanded. The Prometheus II rose from Earth's atmosphere, followed by her sister ships. 4 vessels against more than 600. The odds were absurd, but the humans had never been good at accepting odds. The outer perimeter engagement began 3 hours later. The automated platforms opened fire as soon as the enemy came within range. Hundreds of missiles and energy beams converged on the advancing fleet. The Concorde ships responded with their own fire, targeting the platforms with overwhelming force. It was a battle of attrition, and the platforms could not win. They were stationary targets, unable to dodge or maneuver. One by one, they were destroyed, their weapons falling silent as enemy fire tore them apart. But they did not die quietly. Each platform took enemy ships with it. The missiles found gaps in shields and armor. The energy beams cut through hulls. By the time the last platform fell, the Concorde fleet had lost 18 capital ships and nearly 50 support vessels. Supreme Commander Vonneran, watched the casualties mount with cold anger. The platforms were primitive by Concord standards. Simple, automated systems without the sophistication of true warships. Yet they had cost her nearly 8% of her capital ship strength. "Regroup the fleet," she ordered. "Tighten formation. Increase shield overlap." The fleet obeyed, pulling into a denser formation that would make it harder for individual ships to be isolated and destroyed. It was a defensive adjustment, a sign that Vithron was taking the threat seriously. She wondered what else the humans had prepared. She would learn soon enough. The Mobile Defense Force met the Concord fleet at the orbit of Mars. 4 human ships against more than 500 enemy vessels. It should have been a slaughter. It was a slaughter, just not the one the Concord expected. Captain Okonkwo had spent months studying alien tactics. He knew how they fought. He knew how they thought, and he knew their weaknesses. The Concord races had spent millennia fighting each other and conquering lesser species. They had developed tactics that worked against predictable enemies. Enemies who fought in formations, who responded to threats in standard ways, who could be outmaneuvered and overwhelmed through superior numbers and firepower. Humans were not predictable. The Prometheus II did not meet the enemy head-on. Instead, it darted along the edge of the formation, striking at exposed flanks and withdrawing before the enemy could respond. It used the wreckage of the destroyed platforms as cover, hiding among debris that confused enemy sensors. It employed electronic warfare systems that filled the Concord communications with noise and false signals. The Prometheus III launched its fighter squadrons, hundreds of small ships that swarmed through the enemy formation like angry wasps. The fighters could not destroy capital ships by themselves, but they could distract. They could draw fire. They could identify weak points for the larger ships to exploit. The Prometheus IV hung back, targeting enemy support vessels with its heavy weapons. Without their support ships, the capital vessels would be vulnerable. Fuel supplies would run low, ammunition would be depleted, damage could not be repaired, and the Prometheus I, the original, the ship everyone thought was destroyed, revealed itself. Vithron's eyes widened as the supposedly dead vessel appeared on her sensors. "Impossible," she breathed. It was destroyed, but it had not been destroyed. It had been repaired, secretly, desperately, using every resource humanity could spare. The GDI had hidden the truth from the world, spreading the story of the ship's death while working around the clock to bring her back to life. She was not at full strength. Many of her systems were still damaged, but she was functional, and she was carrying something special. The Prometheus I made straight for the Concord flagship, ignoring the smaller ships that tried to intercept it. Its shields blazed under concentrated fire. Its hull buckled and tore. Crew members died at their stations, killed by explosions and decompression and shrapnel, but the ship kept coming. Vithron ordered all nearby vessels to concentrate fire on the approaching human ship. Dozens of weapons converged on the Prometheus at first, hammering it with enough energy to destroy a moon. The ship's shields failed. Its armor melted. It began to break apart. Still, it came in the final moments when the Prometheus I was nothing more than a burning wreck, held together by luck and determination. Its captain gave the order, "Fire the severance weapon." The wave of distortion that erupted from the dying ship was larger than anything the humans had produced before. It expanded outward in all directions, sweeping through space like a terrible wind. Everything it touched ceased to exist. 37 Concord capital ships vanished in an instant. More than 100 support vessels disappeared. The flagship itself was caught in the edge of the effect, losing its entire rear section before emergency maneuvers carried it out of range. The Prometheus I was gone. Its crew, nearly 3,000 men and women who had volunteered for what they knew was a suicide mission, had given their lives to deliver a blow that would echo through history. Vithron stared at the empty space where a significant portion of her fleet had been. She could not speak. She could not think. In all her years of war, she had never seen anything like this. She had never imagined anything like this. The humans had just killed 10,000 of her soldiers in a single moment. They had destroyed ships that had served the Kothmar for generations. They had wounded her flagship and killed her second-in-command, and they were still fighting. "All ships," she finally managed to say. "Full advance. Destroy everything. No mercy. No prisoners." The battle became a chaos of violence and death. The remaining Prometheus ships fought like demons, striking wherever the enemy formation showed weakness. The fighter squadrons sacrificed themselves to protect the larger vessels, flying into enemy fire to draw attention away from their mother ships. Captain Okonkwo drove the Prometheus II through the heart of the enemy fleet, his crew fighting with desperate fury. The ship took hit after hit, losing systems and personnel with each passing minute. But every hit they took, they returned tenfold. Their weapons carved through enemy ships like knives through paper. Commander Chen coordinated the defense with mechanical precision, her voice calm and steady even as the ship burned around her. She directed fire. She managed damage control. She kept the ship fighting when it should have died a dozen times over. The hours blurred together. Morning became afternoon, became evening, became night. The battle raged across millions of kilometers, leaving a trail of debris and bodies in its wake. By the time the Concorde fleet reached Earth's orbital defense grid, they had lost nearly half their capital ships, more than 100 vessels destroyed, tens of thousands of soldiers killed. The greatest military force the galaxy had ever assembled had been bled white by 4 ships and their supporting craft, but they had not been stopped. Fran looked at Earth hanging before her, blue and green, and so very fragile. Her fleet was wounded, but it was still powerful enough to glass the planet. She would destroy every city, boil every ocean, burn every forest. She would turn this world into a dead rock, a warning to any species that might consider defying the Concorde. Begin the bombardment. She ordered the remaining Concorde ships opened fire on Earth, and Earth fired back. The orbital defense grid was humanity's last surprise. Hundreds of weapons platforms hidden in orbit, disguised as debris or satellites, suddenly came to life. They formed a wall of fire that intercepted the enemy bombardment, shooting down missiles and dissipating energy beams before they could reach the surface. But the grid was designed to defend against a smaller force. Against the weight of fire, the Concorde fleet was pouring out. It could only do so much. Some shots got through. Cities died. Millions of people, despite all the evacuations and preparations, vanished in nuclear fire. Okono watched from the bridge of the Prometheus II as parts of his homeworld burned. Lagos, Mumbai, Shanghai, Sao Paulo. Great cities reduced to glowing craters in moments. He wanted to scream. He wanted to weep. But there was no time for grief. Not yet. All ships. He broadcast on the open channel. This is Captain Okonkwo. They are attacking our home, our families, everything we love. We will not let them win. Follow me. The 3 surviving Prometheus ships turned toward the enemy fleet and charged. What followed was the most intense period of combat in human history. The human ships threw themselves at the enemy with reckless abandon, ignoring damage, ignoring casualties, focused only on destroying as many enemy vessels as possible. The Prometheus III was the first to fall. She had launched all her fighters hours ago, and most had been destroyed. Now she was alone, facing a dozen enemy ships. Her captain, a woman named Yuki Tanaka, who had been an engineer before the war, ordered all power to weapons and flew directly into the enemy formation. She destroyed 6 ships before the Prometheus III finally broke apart. The Prometheus IV went next, rammed by an enemy dreadnought that sacrificed itself to stop her. The collision destroyed both ships, but the dreadnought had carried nearly 10,000 Cathmar soldiers. The exchange was not in the enemy's favor. Only the Prometheus II remained. Okonkwo's ship was barely functional. Shields were gone. Most weapons were destroyed. Half the crew was dead. The hull was breached in a dozen places, and fires burned in compartments throughout the vessel, but she was still fighting. Commander Chen had taken over weapons control after the tactical officer was killed. She fired the remaining guns with grim determination, targeting enemy ships with the precision of a surgeon. Ammunition at 5%, she reported. Hull integrity failing. I am reading multiple cascading failures across all systems. Okono looked at the tactical display. There were still 70 enemy capital ships in the fight. 70 ships against 1 dying vessel. The math was clear. This was the end. All hands, he announced. This is the captain. We have done everything we could. We have fought well. I am proud of every single one of you. He paused, searching for the right words. If this is where we die, Then we die on our feet, fighting for our home. Prepare for final approach. No one objected. No one tried to escape. The crew of the Prometheus II had known from the beginning that they might not survive this battle. They had accepted that possibility. They had made peace with it. The ship turned toward the largest concentration of enemy vessels. What remained of her weapons charged for one final barrage. If they were going to die, they would take as many of the enemy with them as possible. Then the sensors screamed. "Contact!" Chen shouted. Multiple contacts emerging from faster-than-light travel. Bearing. Everywhere. They are everywhere. Okono looked at the display and felt his heart stop. Ships were appearing all across the system. Hundreds of them. Thousands. They were not conquered vessels. They were not human. They were something else entirely. Something that should not exist. The newcomers opened fire. Not on the Prometheus II. On the Concorde fleet, Vothan watched in disbelief as her already decimated fleet came under attack from a force that had appeared from nowhere. The new ships were smaller than conquered vessels, but far more maneuverable. Their weapons cut through shields and armor with ease, and there were so many of them. "What is happening?" she demanded. "Who are they?" No one answered. No one knew. The battle had changed. The Concorde fleet, caught between the damaged Prometheus II and the mysterious newcomers, began to fall apart. Ships that had survived hours of fighting against the humans were destroyed in moments by the unknown enemy. Within 30 minutes it was over. The Concorde fleet was destroyed, not defeated, not scattered, destroyed. Only a handful of ships managed to escape into faster-than-light travel, fleeing into the darkness with news of a disaster beyond comprehension. Vithron was not among the survivors. Her flagship was torn apart by concentrated fire from the newcomers. She died cursing the humans, the mysterious fleet, and the universe that had stolen her victory. On the bridge of the Prometheus II, Okonkwo stared at the aftermath in stunned silence. Earth was burning. His ship was dying. Most of his friends were dead, but humanity had survived. Captain Chen said quietly, "We are being hailed." By the newcomers, Okono straightened in his chair. Whatever came next, he would face it on his feet, put them through. The main display flickered to life. The being that appeared was unlike anything Okono had seen before. It was tall and slender, with features that seemed almost human, but not quite. Its eyes were ancient and knowing. "Captain Okonkwo," the being said, "we have been watching your species for some time. We had hoped you would not need our help. We are pleased to see that you almost did not." "Who are you?" Okono asked. "We are the remnant, the survivors of a civilization that fell to the Concorde 10 million years ago. We have waited in the spaces between the stars, watching, planning, hoping. Today you gave us hope. Today you showed us that the Concorde can be beaten." The being leaned forward. "The war is not over, Captain. It has just begun, and humanity will be at the center of it." The display went dark. Okono looked at Chen. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the stars burned silently over a world that would never be the same. The fires burned for 3 days. Mumbai, Lagos, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Cairo, a dozen other cities. Great monuments to human civilization reduced to ash and radioactive glass by the conquered bombardment. Hundreds of millions dead in the opening moments of the attack. Hundreds of millions more dying in the aftermath from radiation and fire and the collapse of infrastructure. Captain Okonkwo stood on a hill overlooking what had been Geneva and watched the smoke rise into the sky. The city that had served as the headquarters of the Global Defense Initiative was gone. The bunkers beneath it had survived, protecting the leaders and scientists who had guided humanity through the war. But the city itself, with its centuries of history and culture, existed only in memories now. Commander Chen stood beside him. She had not slept in 4 days. Neither had he. There was too much to do, too many people to save, too many decisions to make. "The Prometheus II has been stabilized," she reported. "The engineers say she can be repaired. It will take months, but she will fly again." Okono nodded without looking at her. He was thinking about the dead, the crew members who had trusted him and died following his orders, the civilians who had died, despite all his efforts to protect them. The soldiers on the other Prometheus ships who had sacrificed themselves so that humanity could survive. The remnant have established contact with Director Vasquez. Chen continued. They want to meet, to explain themselves, to discuss what comes next. What comes next? Okono repeated softly. I am not sure I know what that means anymore. He turned away from the burning city and walked toward the shuttle that would take him to the meeting. The remnant had established themselves in orbit around Earth, their ships forming a protective ring that would discourage any further attacks. There were thousands of vessels, ranging from small fighters to massive carriers, that dwarfed even the Prometheus-class ships. A fleet that could have conquered the galaxy hidden for 10 million years. Waiting for this moment, the meeting took place on the largest remnant ship. Director Vasquez represented humanity, accompanied by Okono and the surviving members of the War Council. They were led through corridors of strange design, past technology that seemed almost magical to a chamber where the remnant leaders waited. The being who had contacted Okono during the battle was there. It introduced itself as Kalen, a title rather than a name, meaning something like speaker in their language. It was accompanied by others of its kind, tall and slender figures with ancient eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. We owe you an explanation, Kalen began, and an apology. We could have intervened earlier. We could have prevented much of the destruction that fell upon your world, but we chose to wait. We chose to let you face the Concord alone until the last possible moment. Why? Vasquez asked. Her voice was controlled, but anger burned beneath the surface. Millions of people had died while the remnant watched. Because we needed to know what you were, Kalen replied. We have seen many species rise to challenge the conquered. All of them have failed. They failed because they lacked something essential. Not technology, not resources, not courage. They lacked the will to keep fighting when everything seemed lost. They lacked the ability to sacrifice everything for a chance at victory. They lacked what you call in your language, spite. The remnant leader leaned forward. We watched your first battle. We saw a single ship crewed by beings who had barely left their homeworld destroy a fleet that should have been invincible. We saw your people fight to the last breath, laughing and singing as they died. We saw something we have not seen in 10 million years. Hope, hope, Okono said flatly. You let millions of our people die for hope. Yes, Kalen admitted. We are not proud of this choice, but we have lived in hiding for so long that we had forgotten what it meant to fight. We needed to see that someone else remembered. We needed to know that the fire still burned somewhere in this cold universe. The chamber fell silent. The human representatives looked at each other, processing what they had heard. It was Vasquez who finally spoke. You said the war is not over. What did you mean? The Concord has ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years, Kalen explained. They have conquered or destroyed every species that opposed them. They have built an empire based on fear and domination, but they have never faced a true challenge. They have never been forced to fight for their survival. The display in the center of the chamber came to life, showing a map of the galaxy. 5 regions were highlighted in different colors, representing the territories of the 5 ruling races. Today, you showed them that they can be beaten. The fleet they sent against you was the largest military force in Concord history, and you destroyed it. When news of this defeat spreads, and it will spread, everything will change. Subject races that have accepted conquered rule for millennia will begin to question. Resistance movements that have been suppressed will emerge. The empire will begin to crack. And you want us to finish breaking it? Okono said. We want to offer you a choice, Kalen corrected. You can rebuild your world. You can hide behind our protection. You can try to find peace, hoping that the Concord will eventually forgive what you have done. But they will not forgive. They cannot. Your very existence is a threat to everything they have built. Or you can fight, not alone. The remnant will stand with you. Other species will join us. Together, we can challenge the Concord. We can break their power. We can create a galaxy where species are free to determine their own destinies. Kalen spread its hands. This is not a decision to make lightly. It will take years, perhaps decades. Many more of your people will die. Victory is not guaranteed. But if you do not fight, if no one fights, the Concord will continue ruling the galaxy forever. And one day, they will come for you again. Next time, you may not survive. The meeting continued for hours, discussing details and possibilities. When it finally ended, the human representatives returned to Earth to consult with their people. This was not a decision that could be made by a few leaders in a room. It would affect every person on the planet. Everyone deserved a voice. The debate lasted 3 weeks. Some argued for isolation. They had paid too high a price already. They should focus on rebuilding, on protecting their own world, on creating defenses that would discourage future attacks. Let the rest of the galaxy fight its own battles. Others argued for war. The Concord would never leave them alone. The only way to be truly safe was to destroy the threat at its source. And beyond safety, there was justice. The aliens had attacked without provocation, had killed millions of innocent people. They deserved to be punished. In the end, the decision was made by the people themselves. Every nation held referendums. Every citizen old enough to understand the question was asked. Should humanity go to war? The answer was yes. It was not unanimous. Nothing was ever unanimous with humans. But the margin was overwhelming. 73% voted in favor of joining the Remnant Alliance. 73% chose to fight, knowing the cost, knowing the risk, knowing that victory was far from certain. Director Vasquez announced the decision in a broadcast to the remnant fleet. "Humanity has spoken," she said. "We will fight, not for revenge, though we have earned the right to it, not for conquest because we have no interest in ruling others. We will fight because freedom is worth fighting for, because no species should have to live under the boot of another, because the universe belongs to everyone, not just the powerful." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "Tell your Concord masters that we are coming. Tell them that the age of their dominion is ending. Tell them that the galaxy is waking up, and tell them that humanity sends its regards." The message was transmitted across the galaxy. Within days, it had reached every corner of conquered space. Subject races heard it and felt something they had not felt in generations: hope. Resistance fighters heard it and came out of hiding. Even some members of the ruling races heard it and wondered if maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong about everything. The war that followed would last for 37 years. It began with small actions: raids on supply lines, sabotage of military installations, support for rebel movements on occupied worlds. The Remnant and their human allies struck at the edges of the Concord Empire, testing defenses, learning weaknesses, building strength. Captain Okonkwo commanded the repaired Prometheus II in dozens of these early engagements. He became a legend among the Allied forces, a symbol of what courage and determination could accomplish. His crew grew in skill and confidence. New ships joined the fleet, built-in shipyards hidden throughout the galaxy. The alliance grew stronger with each passing year. The Concord fought back, of course. They sent fleets to crush the rebellion. They destroyed worlds that supported the alliance. They executed prisoners and broadcast the recordings as warnings. But every atrocity only strengthened the resolve of their enemies. Every act of cruelty drove more species to join the fight. Commander Chen rose through the ranks, eventually commanding her own ship, the Prometheus III. She led a squadron that specialized in liberating worlds under Concord control, breaking sieges and rescuing populations. Her name was spoken with reverence on 100 planets. Director Vasquez did not live to see the end of the war. She died in the 15th year, her body finally failing after decades of stress and sacrifice. But before she died, she saw the tide begin to turn. She saw the Concord lose its first major engagement. She saw subject races rising up across the galaxy. She knew that humanity would win. The end came suddenly, as these things often do. The Celestine Imperium was the first to break. Their energy beings had never been comfortable with the brutality of the war. When their leaders were offered peace in exchange for neutrality, they accepted. The Conquered lost its most powerful weapons. The Sundari Collective followed. The hive mind had calculated the probabilities and concluded that the Concord could not win. Survival required adaptation. The Collective switched sides, bringing their vast technological resources to the Alliance. The Obsidian Throne was destroyed. Their homeworld was surrounded by Allied forces, and when they refused to surrender, they were annihilated. The beings of shadow and hunger finally learned what it meant to be prey. The Cathmar fought to the end. It was in their nature. They could not imagine surrender, could not comprehend defeat. They died by the millions, then by the billions, until finally, there were not enough of them left to resist. The surviving Cathmar were scattered across the galaxy, a broken people whose empire existed only in memory. The Veloxi matriarch lived long enough to see everything she had built collapse. On the day the last Veloxi stronghold fell, she sent a message to the human commander who had led the final assault. "I underestimated your kind," she said. Her voice was weak, her body failing after thousands of years of life. "I thought you were insects, primitive, irrelevant. I did not understand what you truly were." "And what are we?" the commander asked. "Survivors," the matriarch replied. "Like us, like every species that has ever crawled up from the mud and reached for the stars. The difference is that you never forgot it. You never grew soft. You never assumed that because you were powerful today, you would be powerful forever." She laughed, a dry and rattling sound. "We thought we ruled power. We thought we controlled the galaxy. But power is not something you can hold. It is something you must constantly earn. We stopped earning it. You reminded us of this truth. Too late for us. Perhaps not too late for whoever comes next." She died an hour later, the last of the great rulers of the Concord, passing into history. The galaxy that emerged from the war was very different from the one that had existed before. There was no single power, no ruling council. Instead, there was the Alliance, a loose confederation of species that had fought together and learned to trust each other. Humanity played a central role in the new order, not as rulers, but as examples. The species that had risen from nothing, that had fought against impossible odds, that had helped free the galaxy from tyranny. Other races looked to them for guidance, for inspiration, for proof that even the weakest could become strong. Captain James Okonkwo retired from active service at the age of 87. His body was old and tired, marked by the scars of 100 battles. His left eye had never been replaced. He had kept the patch as a reminder of the first battle that started everything. On his last day in uniform, he stood on the bridge of the Prometheus II one final time. The ship had been repaired and upgraded many times over the decades, but her heart was the same. She was the vessel that had defied the galaxy and won. Commander Chen was there, older now, but still sharp as ever. She had retired herself the year before, passing command of her squadron to a new generation. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Strange," Okono admitted. "I have been fighting for so long. I am not sure I remember how to do anything else. You will learn. We all will." Chen looked out at the stars visible through the bridge windows. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had surrendered? If we had accepted the Concord's ultimatum that first day sometimes?" Okono said. "But then I remember that surrender was never really an option. Not for us. We are too stubborn, too proud, too convinced that our destiny is our own to shape." He smiled. The galaxy believed they ruled power. They measured it in ships and weapons, and the fear they inspired. They forgot that true power comes from something simpler. The willingness to stand up for what you believe in, no matter the cost. The refusal to accept a fate imposed by others. The faith that tomorrow can be better than today, if you are willing to fight for it. Chen nodded slowly. "And we showed them." "Yes," Okono agreed. "We showed them." They stood together in silence as the stars turned slowly above them. In the years that followed, humanity continued to grow and change. They built new ships and explored new worlds. They forged friendships with species that had once been enemies. They made mistakes and learned from them. They were not perfect, no species ever is. But they never forgot the lessons of the war. They never forgot the courage of those who had died to give them a future. And they never forgot that the universe, however vast and terrifying, could be shaped by those with the will to try. The Prometheus II was eventually decommissioned and turned into a museum. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see the ship that had changed everything. They walked her corridors and touched her walls, and tried to imagine what it must have been like to face the rulers of the universe with nothing but determination and spite. A plaque hung on the bridge inscribed with words that Okonkwo had spoken during the first battle. Words that had become the motto of humanity's expansion into the stars. words that captured everything the species had learned about itself in its journey from primitive world to galactic power. The plaque read simply, "We are still here, and they know it now." The stars burned silently overhead, indifferent to the struggles of the beings who lived beneath them. But those beings were no longer afraid. They had faced the darkness and refused to bow. They had earned their place among the stars, and they would never let anyone take it from them.